Gewalt. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Tanu Rabban. We're 4 lines from the bottom on Daf Tezvav on the base. Tanu Rabban. Ein moichen lem trisen. You're not allowed to sell a shield to a goy. The Yeshomer moichen lem trisen. You're allowed to sell them a shield. My time. What's the reason for that? Ilaim mishum de mignu alayu. What is the svara why you shouldn't be able to sell them a shield? See, a shield is not an offensive weapon. They're not going to kill anybody with it. It's a defensive weapon. So why would you not be able to sell them a shield? If you're going to say it's because it protects them. And at the end of the day, we really want them eliminated. So we shouldn't really sell them anything that will sustain them. Zok the Gemara, by that logic, you shouldn't even be able to sell them food products, because the idea is you're trying to eliminate them. Amarav, Zokrav, you're 100% right. If you're able to avoid selling them even food products without Ava, Rashi says, then by all means, don't sell them anything. But if there's an Ava problem, so avoid selling them whatever you could. But Ikadamri, Trisen, Hainu Taima Deloy, you know why you cannot sell shields? Because they eventually can become offensive weapons. The chishlim zinayu, if the murderers run out of ammunition, katli begavayu, they'll even use their shields as a weapon to kill with. The yeshaimer, there's another svara holds you're allowed to sell a shield to a guy. Moichem lam trisin, the chishlim zinayu ma'arik arki. When they use up their ammunition, they don't kill with their shields, they run away. They abandon the battle. So they will never use it as an offensive weapon. Amar Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua, halacha ki yeshayimrim, that you're allowed to sell a goy a shield because they are going to run away if they run out of ammunition, rather than start using their shields as an offensive weapon. Amar Avoda Barav, ein moichin lehem ashashiyos shel barsel. You're not allowed to sell them bars of steel. My timer. Mishum dechalshi minayu kli, because they could bang and form out of it a kli zayin, a weapon. For Gemara, if you're not allowed to sell them a chunk of metal because they could form it into a weapon, so then you shouldn't be able to sell them any object that's made out of metal. Because mori v'chetzini nami, even any keli made out of metal that you could melt down and reform into a weapon, you shouldn't be allowed to sell them. Amar Avzid, no, not all uranium is weapons grade, and not all steel and iron is weapons grade. The only type of steel that would be weapons grade is beparzala hindua, with Indian iron. Dr. Gemara, now we see Yidden are arms dealers. Yidden do sell arms to governments. Amar Ravashi, it's leparsoi. We sell to the Persians the meganu. We live amongst the Persians, and the fact is that they have an army to defend themselves against marauders, and that's a cause that you're allowed to sell. So there's a couple of interesting things that are discussed over here. First, let's understand what this special iron that came from India is. So, but by irony, that iron was actually referred to as Damascus steel. Why Damascus steel? Because they used to ship their raw material, their steel, to the Indians, and in India they had a special way to process metal, process iron, that made it very strong, but also very lightweight. And what they did was they had an interesting process. When they would smelt down the metal, they would mix it with glass, and somehow that caused all the impurities to come out of the metal, and it became the hardest, strongest iron, very, very appropriate to use for a weapon. And they used to ship that back in bars to Syria, and then the Syrian would now make weapons out of it. That's why it was called Damascus steel. We've all heard of the Iron Age. The times of David and Shlomo Melech were the Iron Age, and that was the time when the world started to understand how to use steel and make things out of steel and forge steel and so on and so forth. Okay, Gewaltig. I just wanted to point out that today is known as the Friday before Parshas Chukas, and it's a day that's a very sad day, and it's a day that many people fast on, and the reason for it is because it's the day that had the most book burnings. In the times of the Baal Tosfos, the Minchas Elazar has a Kabbalah from his Zaydis that the night that the Tosfos in Bava Kama of Ayin Zayin, the long Tosfos of Parah Matama, Tumas Eichel Heil Voice Lashasa Kosher, was the night right before all of the books had to be burned. There are thousands of Gemaras and Svarim that were burnt, and this was before the printing press. So whatever was lost forever. Much of the Torah written by the Bali Tosfos was also destroyed that day, and the Rishonim, we're talking about the Bali Tosfos, they did a I believe I think it's a Shelos Chaloim. They did something, and it came out that on the first words of the parsha Zois Chukas HaTorah, the uncle is Zog Dog Gzeras Araisa. Gzeras could also mean the tearing of. This is the tearing of the Torah, and they saw that it was Min HaShemayim that this would happen. But it was a very tragic day. And we don't commemorate that day based on the day of the month that we usually do. It's always attributed to Erev Shabbos Parshas Chukas because of that gilui of Dog Zeres Daraisa. So we should have simcha. We should be zeicha to extra simcha on this day because normally it's a day of perennials. Agolim usayachim. Tana Rabbi Yehuda Matir b'shvua. If you remember, on the Mishnah said, Rabbi Yehuda holds, although you cannot sell a behemoth to a goy, if it's a broken behemoth that has broken legs, that you could sell to a goy. Why? It's not going to live too long, and therefore no one's going to keep it around for too long. The whole Zara was, even if it's not well, it might stay around. The goy might keep it around, and people are going to think, when the goy originally bought it from the Yid, it was probably healthy, and it became bad now by the goy. So that's a problem. But Zok Rabbi Yehuda, an animal that the goy wouldn't keep around, doesn't have that problem. Amr Loi, the Rabbanan told him, because the Rabbanan hold it's also to sell an animal, even an injured animal, to goy. What do you mean they got rid of it? They have very good reason to preserve it and to keep it, because Aloi Marbi Allah, they use it to breed the oldest, and it gives birth. The chibun de marbin Allah the oldest also l'shuye. They might very well keep this animal around because they can still use it to breed with. Amar Lan Rabbi says, "Let me see you do that." When you can show me one of these animals that gave birth, then you could tell me we're concerned that the goy might keep it. Lemaiset could give birth. So what was Rabbi Yehuda referring to? And you see that an animal in such a condition will not want to have relations. Every time they're going to want to breed it with animal, the cow's going to say, "Not tonight, honey, I have a headache." And therefore, there's no chash that it'll give birth, and it's for that reason that Yehuda held that you're allowed to sell that to a goy. However, when it comes to a sus, that's also a behemoth gasa, and that is an exception to the rule. Ben b'seira mater b'sus. Why? Tana ben b'seira mater b'sus. Normal animals might carry things for you, and you are mitzvah shvisas behemtecha, and therefore we don't let you sell to a goy because you might rent to a goy, you might lend to a goy. But a horse, even if you lent it or rented it to a goy, and the goy rides the sus, that's only on Isur D'Rabbanan, because midaraisa achai noises atzmoi, and therefore there is no chiyuv of shvisas behemta. Your behemoth is not doing a malacha by carrying a chai midaraisa. Therefore, there's no gzera for if the most you could be over is only in the Rabbanon, there's no gzera, and therefore Ben Beser holds you allowed to sell the goy a horse. For Rabbi Yosy, but Rabbi argues, why mipnei beis devarim? There are two reasons why Rabbi decided to ask. Echad mishum teres klizayim. It's just like selling the goy a weapon, and we'll soon see how. The echad mishum teres behemoth gasa, and one is because of the generic behemoth gasa, which the Gemara is going to look for an explanation of. Zok Gemara bishlam teres klizayim. I understand why a horse can be considered a weapon. Ika, the kotlo b'sichufa. There are horses that stomp on somebody with their front hooves, and that kills somebody. So a horse, in fact, can be a weapon, and that's a reason enough not to allow a horse to be sold to a goy. What does Rabbi mean by teres be'megasa? Rabbi Yochanan, you know what it means? It means it is possible that you'll do a malacha with a horse, and you'll be over shvisus behemtach. How is that? Because when this horse gets older and you no longer ride it, you'll harness it up to a mill. And then you'll do malacha with the guy can do malacha with it, and therefore you have the same gzeir of shvisus behemtach. But Amar Rabbi Yochanan halacha kivem b'seira. We pass in l'kula that you are allowed to sell a horse to a guy. Zok teheli gemara. What about a shor shalpetim? A shor that was fattened up. It's a big fat shor. It's made only to shech. It can't do any work. Tiboy l'Rabbi Yehuda, tiboy l'Rabbanan. Sai comes Rabbi Yehuda, who's matir when you sell an animal to a guy that cannot do work, like a broken animal. He might hold that a shor shalpetim, a shor that can't work because it's too fat, that might be also. And tiboy l'Rabbanan, who normally hold it's also even to sell a broken animal to a guy, could be a shor shalpetim mutar. Tiboy l'Rabbi Yehuda. Let's have a look at the shaila according to Rabbi Yehuda. Atkan like a shor Rabbi Yehuda el b'shvura. What type of animal does Rabbi Yehuda allow you to sell to a guy? A broken leg. You know why? The loy asi lechlal malacha. It'll never be able to work. It will never heal. This animal will never be able to work. So therefore, the guy won't keep it around. He'll check it and eat it. Aval high. But if you're talking about an animal that's just overweight, the chimashala, you put it on a diet for a couple of days, give it to Mozambique, asi lechlal malacha. It will be able to work one day. Therefore, it's asur, because a guy might keep it around, and he might actually use it for a malacha, that'll be asur. Oidelma, afidu the rabbanon like asri. Maybe even according to the Rabbanon, it would be mutter to sell to a guy a shor petim, a shor shalpetim. Why? Because like asri hasam elo destami lav l'shchitakai. The reason why the Rabbanon aser, if you sell an animal that has broken legs, it's still not l'shchita. A normal animal does not get sold l'shchita, so there's still a concern that someone will think that the guy bought it when it was whole. Aval high, but a shor shalpetim, it has a big sign on it that says for shchita. The stomach is shchita coin. Normally, a shor shalpetim, you don't let it lose weight. You shecht it and you use it for its meat. So maybe I feel a rabbanon shor. So we end up with a shaila now. What is Allah with a shor shalpetim? May you or may you not sell it to a guy? Tashma. So the Gemara wants to bring a riot. The Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, shall base Rabbi in the times of Rabbi. You know, we learned that on the Yom Edom of the Goy, we had these different wild pagan holidays like Kalanda and Kalandra, and they were all incorporated into Christianity and became part of Karatzmich because they were having a hard sell on that religion. So they were trying to include as many pagan wild animals as possible in their religion. So one of the rituals that they used to do is they used to force the Jewish community to provide a very expensive gift to the leader there. So in the times of Rebbe, what they would force the community, the Jewish community, to give is hayu makrivin shor shalpetim b'yamedam. They used to force Klal Yisrael to be makriv a shor shalpetim b'yamedam. So you might jump, that's mamish avodah zara. Zogin the Rishonim, such as the Ibn Chananel, the Ritva, and I believe Rashi says it as well. Makrivin mas v'darin. It doesn't mean they were makriv on the mizbech. It means they brought it. They merely gave it as a gift. So they gave a live, big, fat shor to the government, to the goyim, on the day of their avodah zarah. Now, there's no this shor would not be brought to avodah zarah. There's no chashash of avodah zarah. We don't have that chashash here. The only problem that you have over here might be that you're giving an ox to a goy. You're not allowed to sell or give a behemah gasa to a goy. So that's the only potential problem. Now, what Rebbe did was he wanted to put a stop to this practice. He was a very rich man, so chaser dala derivavon. Rebbe, it's a chalos kosten, 4 ribuyos of mammon, which is a lot of money, to bribe the king over there, so that they could push off that the gift shouldn't be done on that day, the Yom Edom, it should be done on Boxing Day. Then he wanted to further press it. So Chaser Dal the Rivavon, he bribed another huge amount of money. So they shouldn't have to give them a live animal. They should be able to give them this animal shechted. And then again, Chaser Dal the Rivavon, again he bribed with another vast amount of money. That they shouldn't have to give this present to be mevatel this whole custom. So, frankly, my time, why was Rebbe so interested in eliminating this practice? Lav mishum dilma also l'shuye. He wanted him to give a dead animal, not a live animal. Why is that? It's because he was afraid of this problem of giving a behemagasa to a guy. So you have a raya that even a shor shel petem, you're not allowed to give to a guy. Zok to Gemara, not at all. If you think that's what Rebbe was trying to do by convincing them or bribing them to accept a dead animal rather than a live animal, you think that was Rebbe's intention? To avoid giving a shor petem to a guy? Of course not. What about the other bribe, where he asked, instead of doing it on Yom Edom, do it tomorrow? That doesn't change anything. So clearly what Rebbe was trying to do was not to avoid the Isser of giving a shor shel petem to a goy, because it's not usher. So what was his intention? My time, El Rebbe me'aker milsaboy. He wanted to get rid of this whole crazy, demeaning custom. The Savar, and he figured, if I try in one fell swoop to go over to the king and say, I'll give you a lot of money, be mevatel this whole horrible minhag, it won't work. But he did it in piecemeal, little by little. Vasi porta porta. First, he bribed to change it a little bit. Then he bribed to change it a little bit more. And eventually, he got his way. You make subtle changes that aren't noticed. That's what Rebbe tried to do.
Yeah, but he was giving him not only the behemoth in the end, but he was giving him the money, both of them connected to the yontif.
He only had to do that for 3 years.
What's that?
He only had to do that for 3 years.
Well, he didn't know that it would work the way he wanted it to work.
In fact, that's how bribes work. They don't always work. You got to try. You got to hope.
Yeah, but you're giving them the money because of the yontif and the par because of the yontif.
The money to bribe the king so that they shouldn't have to give for the yontif.
But it arrives there because of the yontif.
Well, indirectly, that's why he gave it. But he was trying to save the community from having to do that. So you're saying, how do you solve a problem by making it bigger?
Right.
I hear. I don't know. The way bribes work could be the shor shel petem went to the whole government or the whole community. Maybe the 400 riboy went only to the king's pocket.
No, that's possible. Yeah.
That's how most bribes work, right?
But you're giving it to a guy anyway, right? Yeah. That's the issue, giving it to a guy.
Giving a behemagasa to a guy.
And even a gift of money to a guy for their yontif.
Only if it's on Yom Edom. We don't know when Rabbi handed over the money. It could have been 2 weeks before. But as long as it's not within 3 weeks within 3 days of Yom Edom.
But it's clearly connected to the Yom Edom.
Yeah. I mean, the king that year will say, thank you, Getchke, you got me that bribe.
That's right.
I hear. So let's go back to our Shaila. We had a Shaila, whether or not you're allowed to, we don't have a raya, but the Shaila was whether or not you're allowed to sell a shor shel petem. What's the problem of selling a shor shel petem? Will it go back to work or not? Because if it's going to be shechted, it's for sure not a problem. So the Gemara is probing, is that true? Are you telling me that if you let the animal remain and you bring it back down to a normal weight, are you going to tell me it's going to be a productive animal? Amar Ravashi, absolutely it will be. It'll be uber productive. Amar li Zvida told me that Bartura, if you have a shor shel petem, machinally you could let it lose weight, and then v'ovid al chatrein, it will do double the work that a typical shor would be able to do. So, if you never overweight, no, you could be productive. But if you're overweight and you lose weight, you're supercharged. Okay, sag the Heilige Mishnah weiter. Ein moichin lehem doivin varoyish. You're not allowed to sell goyim wild animals that can be a menace to society, that they can use to kill Yidden with. And the chol davar sheyesh boy nezek l'rabba. Anything that will be a menace to society. Another thing you're not allowed to do is ein banyan imoin basiliki. You're not allowed to build a basilica. A basilica is a type of building that has a certain architectural form, and we know in England those churches have some of them are called a basilica. I think that's where they make levias. Basilica's architecture is you have a large domed roof in the center. So imagine a long building, a long rectangular building. So the center portion, let's say it's 30 feet wide. So the 10 center feet have a huge high dome over it. And then the 10 feet on either side of the 30 have a lower roof. And underneath the dome, so the separation between the domed area on either side has a row of pillars. So that was the type of architecture that a basilica was. As a matter of fact, the Lishkas Hagozis was built in that same fashion. But you're not allowed to help a goy build at Rashi because this is a place where the goyim would condemn Jews to death. So since it's possible that a Yid will be killed there, will be condemned to death there, you're not allowed to assist in building those. Garden was the platform that they would push the Yidden off to let them fall to their death. So you're not allowed to build that either. Itztadia is a coliseum where they make Yidden fight wild animals and let them get ripped apart. So that's also something that a Yid should not be involved in building. Bima is also a platform on which they would kill people. So those things you're not allowed to do. What are you allowed to do? Rashid's bimu siyos were places where they used to be makrib l'avoda Zara, and Rashi holds that's not a problem because you're just building the mizbeach. You're not involved in the carbon, so it's like a lifnei de lifnei. Tosfos says it's very hard to accept that a yid should be allowed to build a mizbeach for a getchke. So he changes the gears from bimu siyos with a base to dalet to dimu siyos, and that's referring to digging deep to reach hot springs, to reach hot water for the purposes of a bathhouse. Or bathhouses as well, you're allowed to build. Now, in the bathhouses, there used to be a nook that was built to place their getchkala. If you're building this bathhouse for the goy, and you reach that point where you have to build now this little nook, that you don't do. Also, live noise, that would be also to do. You have to abandon that point. Now, we have a lotion of Shamamidim Bavadis Kachavim. It's interesting that the Rishonim are Geiris a little bit different. If you look at Rashi, Kippur is Arvild, Derech Oivdi Kachavim Lahamid, the Mus Aphrodita, an Aphrodite, would be put the base of Merchat Shalhem. So the Tziyonim say that this Aphrodita is from the censer. It used to say Avoda Zara, and they changed it to Aphrodita, which is Aphrodite. Which is what they would put what they put in their bathhouses. I guess it prompted mating. I don't know exactly what their intention
I
was.
think that is an Avoda Zara, isn't it? Aphrodite is a
could be the type of Avoda Zara, and why would the censor change it from Avoda Zara to Aphrodita? Maybe because in that area that wasn't an Avoda Zara to them, so it wouldn't be as offensive. I'm not sure exactly why the Girsa would have changed.
Yeah, that's where they get the word aphrodisiac, right?
Today, an Aphrodite is like strawberries and chocolate, not a piece of stone. Okay, so there's a very interesting halacha lemaisa that's extracted from this Mishnah. Somebody asked Rabbi Moshe, I'm an architect, and my firm has undertaken to design a church. Am I allowed to be involved in the project? Am I allowed to design a church? So Moshe says, what's the shaila? You're allowed to build a church. You're allowed to build a church up until the point that you're building the platform for the getchke. But you're allowed to build a church. So Kolchkin just to do paper plans for a church is 100% mutter. Now, it's not nice as a davar shel kiyur, but it's 100% mutter. And therefore, if there'll be Ava, or if in fact, if you need it for parnasa, Avoda, you're allowed to be an architect for a church. And not only that, even though you're not allowed to walk into the following type of places, you're even allowed to be an architect for a reform or conservative shul, the Moshe Passos, no problem. So if you want to design a shul, because you'd even be allowed to build it up until the point where you're reaching the Makom Avodah Zarah. Zok the Heilige Gemara, right? Amr Rab Chanan bar Rab Chisda, the Amrila Amr Rab Chanan bar Rava, Amr Rav. Chaya Gasa, Harei Kibehema Dakala, Pirchos Avaloy Lemachir. Now, a Chaya Gasa is probably like a moose, maybe a lion. A lion is a shaila, but we're talking, it's a chaya, but it's a big one, like a big animal. Now, the question here is as follows. The halacha is, when we shecht an animal and we want it to be kosher, we need to be sure that the behema died due to the shechita and it wasn't dead before the end of the shechita. So there's a test that all sheikhim have to do after the shechita to make sure that this animal was alive and well until the end of the shechita. And what is that test? They see if it's flailing, if it's jerking around. Right? Animals have this reaction after they die. Now, a cow, all it has to do is move its limb a little bit, and that will be an indication that this cow was live and well until the shechita. However, a behemoth daka has to move more than that. A behemoth daka has to stretch its arms out and then retract them. So it has to have a double movement, and if it doesn't do that double movement after the shechita, we actually consider that an avela.
I just looked up I just Googled Aphrodite. It's an ancient Greek goddess associated with love, beauty, pleasure, and procreation. So it is an Avodah Zarah.
And it's not a god, it's a goddess.
Goddess, right.
It probably comes undressed.
Well, the picture she's dressed. But you're right, probably does. It's probably...
that's how it's promoted. It's basically,
yeah, right.
It's the god of pornography. Basically.
That's right.
You know, if you walk up Collinson from Wilson North, there's a home. At least in my days, 20 years ago, there's a home on the right side, on the east side, that has like a fountain, a big concrete fountain with a big Aphrodite statue in it. I'm not sure if it's still there or not. I remember I was once walking with Heshi Woman. He said, "Tonish getting the gas. We have to walk around." So he wouldn't walk up that block. Okay, so Zok the Gemara. Oh, so what do we have here? We have this rule that a behemoth daka has to do a bigger pirchus. It has to stretch its arms out and bring its arms back. Otherwise, we'll consider it an avela. So what about a chaya gasa? Is it like a big cow? It only has to move a little bit of pirchus in order that we should declare it as not an avela, as a shchuta, or maybe it also has to make that double movement. So Rav paskin l'chumra chaya gasa harehi kebehema daka lepirchos, and it needs like a double pirchos. It has to stretch its arms out and pull them back in after the shechita. Now that's not really relevant to our sugya, but the next comment is relevant. Avaloy lemechira, chaya gasa is not considered like a behema daka. And sometimes in a city where there's a chash of revia, you're not allowed to sell to a goy. But in the city where there's no chash revia, you are allowed to sell to a goy. No, rather it's like a behema gasa, and you're never ever allowed to sell a chaya gasa to a goy. That's what Rav said. But Vani Omer, Rab Chanan, who quoted Rav, says, I disagree with Rav, and I hold af lemechira mokum shenhagu limkar moichrin shaloi limkar ein moichrin. So I also treat a chaya gasa like a behema daka, and sometimes, and since we're not choshish that it will do malacha, I hold it's only also if there's a chash review. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah. Ein moichin lehen doivin b'arayos. Our Mishnah we just learned. What type of chayos gasos may you not sell? Only those that pose a menace to society. So Taima, the only reason why this chaya gasa you cannot sell it to a goy is the isbe nezet l'rabim. If it would be a chaya gasa that was not a danger to society, sure, it would be mutter, so you have a right to Chanan against Rav. Zok to Gemara, no. Maybe what the Tana is trying to be mashma from his halacha is to exclude Amar Rabbi Babula ba'ari shaver. Maybe, you know what he's referring to? A healthy doiv and arya you can't sell, but a broken doiv and arya, which is not going to be a menace to society that you are allowed to sell. If it's broken, guess what? It can't do malacha either. So therefore, you'd be allowed to sell it. But if you had a full and complete and healthy chaya gasa, maybe in fact it is royal malacha, and in fact you cannot sell it to a guy, and therefore our Mishnah is not a kash on Rav, but our Mishnah that says that on a reshover, a broken lion, you're allowed to sell, it has to be a libud Rabbi Yehuda, because it's only Rabbi Yehuda who holds that if the behema is injured, you're allowed to sell it to a guy. Rabashi Omar Stam Ari Shaver Hu Eitzel Malacha. Every Ari is considered broken l'gabi malacha, because guess what? Lions aren't good at doing work. You try tying up a lion to your plow or to your wagon and see how well that works for you. So Mamela, you can never do malacha with a lion. Therefore, if it's not a menace to society, you'd be allowed to sell it. If it wasn't a menace to society, you'd be allowed to. But I'll call upon them if the one was not a menace to society, it would be usher to sell, just like a behemagasa, like Rav learns. But an ari can never be used for malacha. Therefore, it would be mutter to give to a guy, to sell to a guy. Meisvei. So we're going to have another kasha. This time we're not going to ask a kasha on Rav. We're going to ask a kasha on Reb Chanan, and we're going to prove that a chaya gasa you cannot sell to a guy, because the Brisa says, "Kishem she'ein moichin lahen behema gasa, kach ein moichin lahem chaya gasa." This doesn't need a deal; it's black on white. Va'afilu b'mokim she'moichin lahen behema daka, chaya gasa ein moichin lahen. Black and white supporting Rav, black and white slugging up Reb Chanan, tiyufta to Reb Chanan by Rava tiyufta. He's August. Now we're going to have different variations of learning the exact same thing like we just learned. We have our Mishnah that we were originally medayik to support Rav Chanan, and then we forever it even according to Rav. We have a brisa that clearly supports Rav. So what happened is Ravina Rami Masnisin a brisa. Ravina wasn't addressing directly the machlokes Rav and Reb Chanan. He stamazoi asked the kasha between the Bryce and the Mishnah, just like we did over here too, and we ended up bringing a raya to Rav. Umeshani, and he answered the same way we just answered. Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, in Moichalam Doivim Varoyes, V'lo called over Sheish Ben Nezek L'Rabim, Taima the Is Ben Nezek, Halas Ben Nezek Moichin. So from our Mishnah, at first glance, it's mashma that you can sell a chaya gasa to a guy. But over a minute, we have a brisa that contradicts that. Kishem shein moichin beima gasa, kach ein moichin chaya gasa, va'afilu b'mokim shemoichin beima daka, chaya gasa ein moichin. So it's a stira. Mashani, we answered, either barishavar v'alima Rabbi Yehuda. Our Mishnah is speaking by an arishavar, and only according to Rabbi Yehuda are you allowed to sell it to a guy. Our Ravashi Amar Stam arishavar who ate some malacha. Every ari is shavar who ate al malacha, and therefore you're allowed to sell it to a guy because he can't use it for malacha, and he's not going to keep it around. Now, what's interesting to note, when Rabashi said stam ari shavar who ate al malacha, so does that mean it lies like an ari shavar, and Viter the Mishnah would only be able to go according to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds you allowed to sell an ari shavar? That's what Rashi learns. Tosfos learns no. Once you have this far stam ari shavar, even the Rabbanon would agree that you could sell it. And why is that? Zokt the Tosfos right up on top. Pirush HaKuntras, the Azuk Rabbi Yehuda, the Shari B'Shvura, and all Aris are considered Shvura because they don't do work. Al Rabbanon Dasri B'Shvura would Asur Nami Vari. But the Riyaimer no. Ta'afilu K'Rabbanon Nami Asya. Now our Mishnah could even be going according to the Rabbanon. The Atkan Lo Yasur Rabbanon. Where did the Rabbanon say that an animal that's shavar you can't sell? People are going to say, yes, the owner has a broken behema, but he bought it from the yid when it was complete and he got injured by the guy. So you still have a chash that someone's going to sell to a guy. Anyone seeing a guy that has the lion that he bought from yid will know that this was an animal that you could never have done malacha with. So therefore, it would fit in good even according to the Rabbanon. So you have a machlekes Rashi and Tosfos. If this shot of Rav Ashi that on the reason is always shavar eitzel malacha, that the machlekes Rashi and Tosfos that would fit in even according to the Rabbanon. So that is Ravina's approach. She asked us, Stephen. Rav Ashi was able to bring a raya from the Mishnah alone to Rav. If you remember, we asked a kash on Rav from the Mishnah. We deflected and said it's speaking by an Arishover, and then we only ended up bringing a raya to Rav from the Brisa. But Rav Ashi was medayik from our Mishnah Gufa to prove Rav's point that you're never allowed to sell a chaya gasa to a guy. Rav Ashi daik masnisin umoisav tiyufta from the Mishnah alone. Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, and moichin lahem doivim varayos v'lo davar sheish by nezek l'Rav. And we make a diik from our Mishnah. Time of the is by nezek, halas by nezek, if it's an animal that wouldn't be a menace to society, moichin. But what type of animal? Dafka ari, the time of ari, this dam ari shavar it's a malacha. So the Mishnah says the only type of chaya that you would be able to sell to a goy if it was not a menace to society was an ari. You know why? Because an ari can't do any productive work. But a moose that you could harness up and you do something with, you would not be able to sell to a goy. So from the Mishnah Minei you see Tiyufta the Rav Chanan Bar Rava Tiyufta, and you have a right that you're not allowed to sell a chaya gasa to a goy. So frankly, we have all this discussion. A chaya gasa you can't sell to a goy because the goy might use it for work. You tell me what type of work is appropriate for a chaya gasa. The chaya gasa mios my malacha avda. Omer Rabbi, I'll tell you. Omer li Mar Yehuda. Mar Yehuda told me that the Vei Mar Yuchni, the people of Mar Yuchni, the family of Mar Yuchni, Tachni Rechayim Barudi. You know what type of animals they used to operate their mill? They used to use wild donkeys. So you see, even wild animals you could harness in order to do productive work. Amar Rab Zera. Rab Zera said, Ki avinon bei Rav Yehuda. I was once by Rav Yehuda. And Amar Lani told us the following statement. Gemirumi noi hamilsa. I want you to listen carefully to the Chiddush in Halacha that I'm about to tell you. You know why I want you to listen carefully? The Megava Rabba Shamili. I heard it from a great person. V'lo Yadana, Rabbi Yehuda was first a Talmud of Rab, and after Rab died, Rabbi Yehuda went to Shmuel's yeshiva. So he was a Talmud of both. So therefore, V'lo Yadana, Rabbi Yehuda said, I don't know what Rabbi Yehuda meant when he said, I heard this from my great Rebbe, Imei Rav, Imei Shmuel. But what was the halacha that Rabbi Yehuda learned? Chayagasa harei kibei medaka lepirchas. It's like behemedaka lepirchas and needs a double pirchas. He asoi lekurkunya, I guess it was something of a city. Ashkechei Rab Zera met Rab Chia bar Ashi, the Yosy v'ka'amar mishmei de Shmuel, he was saying over halacha that he learned from Shmuel. And what was that? Chayagasa harei kibei medaka lepirchas. So Amina, when I heard this, Shema Amina mishmei de Shmuel itmar. Now I know that Shmuel is the makar of this halacha. So when Rabbi Yehuda told me he heard it from his great Rebbe, it must mean that Rabbi Yehuda heard it from Shmuel. But then, but when I got to Surah, Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah, I met Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah, and he told us the Yosy v'kamal b'shmei de Rav chayigas hareyu kivei medakal apirchos. Amina. So you know what I deduced from here? Shema Amina itmar b'shmei de Rav v'itmar b'shmei de Shmuel. When Rabbi Yehuda said I heard it from my great Rebbe, he meant from his great Rebbe Rav and from his great Rebbe Shmuel. But kisalikas lahasam. But when I went to Eretz Yisrael, I ran into a problem. Because Ashkechaseiler of Asi, I found Rav Asi, the Yosy v'ka'amar, and this is what he told me. Amar Rab Chama bar Guria mishmei de Rav chayagas arei kibei medakal apirchas, which means he didn't hear Rav's halacha over from Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah. Rather, it was related by Rab Chama bar Guria. So the question is, who did Rav speak to? Did he give this halacha over to Rab Chama bar Guria, or did he give this halacha over to Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah? Amrilei v'lo savar lamar the man mar the shmaitzer Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah. You don't agree with me that it was Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah who heard this from Rav, who told it to us? You're attributing it to Rab Chama bar Guria. Amrli, you know what he answered to me? You know what Rabasi answered to me? What's the difference? Pazi Uchma, blackened guy. What do you mean blackened guy? You know somebody who works hard, he gets black and dark from the years of toiling. A Talmud Chacham that toils and learning used to get black. Why? From the toil and learning. As Rashi says, Uchma shenishtacher ayidei malacha The same way Rabbi says, I'm totally learning and I'm blocked from learning, you as well are. We both can put our heads together and come to a resolution that fits in with everybody. Between my efforts and your efforts, Tistayim Shmaitza will be able to clarify the halacha. And what he meant to say is that, yes, they both said it over, but you know who heard it directly from Rav? That was Rab Chama Bar Guya. Rab Chama Bar Guya heard it directly from Rav, and he told it over to Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah. So when Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah was saying something over in the name of Rav, he didn't hear it directly from Rav, he actually heard it from Rab Chama Bar Guya. Itmar Nami, and we even have another halacha that was quoted that makes this crystal clear. Amar Rab Zara said, Amar Rav Asi, in the name of Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Bar Yirmiyah said in the name of Amar Rab Chama Bar Guya, and then finally Amar Rav. So now you see the chain of communication. Chayagas arehi kebei medaka lepirtus. Gewaltig. Okay. Zok the heilige Gemara weiter. I'm going to learn this again tomorrow because this is where I got up to last night with Daniel Finkelshire, but we can go a little weiter. Ein boyin, you're not allowed to build a basilica. Amar Rabbi Bar Bachana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Gimel basilica. There's three types of basilicas used for different purposes. There's shalmalche oivdei kechavim, which are used for their honor. Vishal merchatzois, and those that house bathhouses. Vishal oitrois, and those that house warehouses. Amar Rava, Beis leheter, two out of these three are mutter. The echad leisrael, only one of them is aser. The simin, how do you know 2 out of 3 are mutter, and only one is aser? It's lesser ma'chayim bezikim. Which one is aser? The one that is for the covenant of malachim, that's going to be aser. Why? Zakrashi shedanin sham nefashos. In the one that they would build for the honor of the king, that's where they would have capital punishment dinim. Therefore, you're not allowed to build it. V'ikadami amarava kulam leheter. You're allowed to build all types of basilicas. Frank Gemara, how could you say that? Our Mishnah Beferish outlaws a basilica. Vatnan ein boinin imoin basilki gardom and its tadja ubima. Zakt Gemara, maybe the way you should teach our Mishnah is not it's us to build a basilica. It's us to build a basilica gardom, because the gardom was also built in such a style of architecture, and in its tadja, the Colosseums were also built with that style of architecture. So a regular basilica you're allowed to build. You're not allowed to build the basilica of a gardum and the basilica of an itztadja and the basilica of a bima. So ema shel gardum, the shel itztadja, the shel bima. But a regular basilica you're allowed to build. Padar Rabbanan. Kishenitfas Rabbi Eliezer Leminus. Rabbi Eliezer was once captured and squeezed by Apikorsim. And what did they do? They took him to the garden, meaning his life was being decided upon. He was in a very dangerous position. The ruler told him, an elderly wise man like you, Rabbi Eliezer, but you're going to be Isaac and Torah and Narishkeiten. You should be in science, you should be in the arts, you should be sophisticated. With the Torah. So the words that Rabbi Eliezer used, he said, Nemel alai hadayin, I accept what the dayin is saying. So Kesover, the Hegmoin thought that Rabbi Eliezer was acquiescing to him. Olafu Omer, Nemel hadayin, you know what, I trust you, dayin, I'm going to lower myself to you, I'm going to accept your Avoda Zara. But that's not at all what he meant. He meant that Kadosh Baruch Hu, I'm accepting the punishment that you're putting me through now, that I'm going to be killed for sticking to the Torah. As Rashi says, the you gave me this big tzara, I must deserve it, I must have done an aveira that I deserve to be in this predicament. So the Hegmoin, thinking that Rabbi Eliezer was giving in, since you accepted me and you believe in me, Demos, he swore in the name of Avoda Zara called Demos, that Potter Ata, you're going to be Potter. So he got out literally by the skin of his teeth. So he came home. You would think he would be like Mar Cohen, he would be shining and glowing. He was totally tzabrochen. They wanted to be Menachem because he felt bad. He must have done terrible aveiros that he was put into such a predicament. But like he couldn't be comforted until Amalei Rabbi Kiva told him, Rabbi, Tasheni loimer davar echad mimashalim adatani. Let me tell you over something that you taught us. So you have to agree with it because you taught this to us. Amalei Emar, okay. So Rabbi Elazar said, let me hear what you have to say. Amalei Rabbi Shema minas baliyotcha. Maybe what you did wrong is you encountered some dover minus v'hanacha and you enjoyed it and you agreed to it. Rashi says Yosher adavar beinecha, and maybe that's what caused you all this tsar. Amalei Akiva. So Rabbi Elazar told Rabbi Akiva, you're right. Now that you mention this, it tickles my memory. His kartani, I remember a story. I was once walking in the upper shuk of Tzipuri. I met an apikoros, a min, and he told me a lokshen toida apikoros, and I liked it. I liked it, and that's why I'm being punished. Amalei, he told me as follows. It says in your Torah, loisavi esnan zoina. You're not allowed to bring an esnan zoina as a carbon. What about ma lasos hemenu beis knesses lekoyin gadol? Could you beis kisei lekoyin gadol? Could you make out of the esnan? Could you use the esnan to build a kisei, which is a davar shel bezoyin? Maybe you should be allowed to. I didn't have a haloch. I didn't have a psak for it. So Amalei, he told me, this is what my Avoda Zara, my Getchke, my Apikoros taught. He stellt to a different pasuk, a pasuk in Micha, and this is what the pasuk says: K'mei esnan zoyna kafta, you gathered from an esnan zoyna, but esnan zoyna yoshuv. It'll go back to esnan zoyna. What does that mean? How do we darshan it? This esnan came from a dirty place. It came from a mice in the hola. You know where you should purpose this money? To a Mokam Atinovis. It's a great place. Apply it to build a bathroom. Vanahani Hadavar. I like that shot. I liked it. Whether it's true or not, I liked it. It's a perfect place for an Esnan Zonia build a base of Kisei Adam. Al Yidei Zen it passed the Luminus. So that's why I'm being punished, because I sort of agreed to Minus the Varti al Mashakaza B'Torah Hachek Me'aleha Darkecha. Keep your way far away from it. Zuminus V'al Tekarev al Pesach Beisa, and don't get too close to the house. Zurashus, stay away from rubbing shoulders with the rich and famous, with the powerful. Stay away from that. Okay, we'll stop here, as Hashem, and we will continue tomorrow, but we'll start back from the beginning of this shtickle.